So there is that element to it, and you have to be aware of it, because sometimes it comes from a really deep place that people just don't think women should be speaking up and speaking out and doing what we do. And when possible, you need to call that out. You can't let that just
That's where my next question is going for you, because I wonder, and it's funny, we talk about, old white guys in politics, and I'm like, my dad's an old white guy, he's great. You're like, you're an old white guy, you're the best. But there is when it permeates, let's be real. So I don't think that's a healthy argument. I think that when we talk about when any one group of people controls all of the messaging, and I heard a data scientist at Harvard last week talk about how even AI is corrupted because it's all encoded from the pale male gaze, and how we have to start being more inclusive. And the lack of inclusivity is what lets this undercurrent of misogyny fester. And my question for you, Mr. President, is what that must be like for you to witness, knowing who this woman is, how you have had to, within your relationship and your political advocacy, see this double standard as it applies to her. Like, you're from Arkansas. I'm like, how are you avoiding getting in a bar fight every weekend, like defending this woman's honor? How do you keep your cool? Because you both do it really, really well.
It was awful. I'll be honest with you, it was awful. Because, look, I'm used to these attacks from the right. I went through them all the time I was a kid. I lived through the civil rights years. I went through all this stuff. I'm used to the Republicans trying to take me out because I was a white Southern Protestant male,
Yes.
And I asked one of my friends who was a Republican, I had a friend in relationship, I said, why do you guys hate me so much? He said, hell, you betrayed us.
Wow.
There ain't supposed to be any white Southern Protestant men, still Democrats. So I went through that, and I said, well, I feel so bad for you. But they really hated me because I beat them. And they tried to beat me, but I had an insurmountable advantage because I was a white Southerner. So I could be for civil rights. I could have more gays in my administration than anybody ever had before then. I could be for women's rights and put more women in the cabinet and do things that nobody had done because I had this little subconscious cultural shield, and it made the Republicans hate me more, but it made them mad because some people would still vote for me because they didn't seem like an alien. So I knew all that. It's like I knew the first time I saw Donald Trump on that stage with those other Republicans, he had a chance to win because I knew how crazy with resentment people had got, and how they demonized President Obama and all that, and then the Republicans, butter wouldn't melt in their mouth when Hillary was Secretary of State. They thought she was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Until they thought she was going to run for president, and all of a sudden they let up on Obama because he couldn't run again, and took it out on her.
Wow.
And I knew what a game it was. A lot of this stuff is just a game. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever been through because, when they stood up and said she was reckless with the national security and all that, I have consumed more secret intelligence than almost anybody who voted in the last election. And I knew the whole thing was a lie. It wasn't just unbalanced. The whole thing was a sham. And I had to see her, I watched her. Here's a woman that's still got her best friend from childhood that she talks to, that everybody that's ever worked with her, she's got all of her friends. I go home to Arkansas, and there's still a group called the Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families that she started 40 years ago. I go to Northern Ireland, and these Irish women who don't want to lose the peace process talk about vital voices and all the work Hillary did. I think, if there's ever anybody who's been on the level and just sort of shows up and goes to work and tries to make something good happen every day, that's her. And I realized I felt so helpless because I realized I literally had a moment where I thought, you probably should have left me because then people would believe me when I defend you. But if you're married to somebody, they can just dismiss you. Well, what do you expect? He just probably wants to go live in the White House again. Or, well, what do you expect him to say? He's got to go home and live at night. And I felt like totally helpless in the face of something I thought was literally madness. And all these people got carried away with all this, and they didn't realize that America had the best chance in the world to resist all this Brexit stuff. Because we were more diverse, we were younger, we were vibrant, our economy was functioning better, but we did have real problems. And we had a very bad information ecostructure, and everybody thought we could play games with our democracy. And whenever you play the game, there's one set of rules for me and another set for everybody else. You were risking the delicate balance that has to be preserved. And look, everybody here, you got your favorite hockey team, your favorite sports team, we're all traveling somewhere or another. There are a million Ukrainians living in Canada. So we all have our tribes. I've met several people of Asian descent here in the audience. The question is your tribal inclusive or divisive? We're living through a global period where we're trying to get the kinks out of globalization, where we don't know what the end of it's going to be, where people get empowered by saying our differences matter more than what we have in common. And she got caught in the ring. And it just made me sick. That was the most helpless I've ever felt in my life. Everybody said, I was a great explainer. I couldn't explain my way out of a paper bag while somebody's screaming at the top of their lungs and doesn't want to hear it. So it was awful for me. It was the most awful experience I ever had. I thought, she helped me all those 25 years, so I said, okay, I'll give you 25 years, and if I'm still alive, we'll fight about the rest. Really, it's what I told her. In 1999, she started running for Congress. I said, okay, you gave me 25 years. She was running for the Senate. I said, I'll give you the next 25, and then if you're still around, we'll fight about the rest. And so I still got a little time to go. I got 5 more years all over here. And for all the world, I never thought the one thing that I was best at, I'd be rendered useless at. And that's the way I felt. I felt like she was the ablest public servant I ever knew, and I couldn't defend the obvious. Not the unobvious, the obvious strength. And it broke my heart. And I didn't blame Donald Trump. He was just being who he is.
You don't have
No. He was who he is. Look, politics is a contact sport. If you don't want to get hurt, you should play a different game. And he just was being himself. But he had a lot of enablers who, somebody's got to be there to call balls and strikes and fouls.
Right.
And somebody's got to, America lost a lot, I think, making that decision. But I don't want Canadians to judge us by one election. Give us an election.
Before I ask the next question, I just have to acknowledge, I think I can speak for everyone when I say it's a devastating thing to imagine that feeling of helplessness. And I imagine not an easy thing to come back from. But thank you for staying in it with us.
It's like, I tell you, if you've never been in politics, imagine this. Suppose you're at a crosswalk, and the person you love most in the world is walking across the street, and there's a truck bearing down, and you want to go out and push him out of the way. And you've had your day in the sun. It's not any tragedy if you get even hit because you've had such a great life. I mean, every day is a gift to me. I'm the oldest man in my family for 3 generations. So, man or woman now, until you get to my great-grandparents. And all of a sudden, you're frozen and your legs don't work anymore. That's the way I felt. I felt I have never felt more useless and frustrated and heartbroken in my life, because I thought, it was terrible for her, but I'm old enough to know there are no permanent victories or defeats in politics. It was a terrible thing for America at this moment in time and for the rest of the world, I thought. Now, you're free to disagree with me, but if you don't disagree with me, you can certainly feel how I felt. I felt like she was always there for me in every dark and bright moment. And she was always saving my bacon when I needed it, and always taking care of things. And at one time, she needed somebody that could talk an owl out of a tree, which I can normally do. I couldn't do it because of the nature of the times, the nature of the information eco-structure. And I didn't want people saying, let's think of it, if I do something good, they say, oh, the poor girl needs her husband. You know, you couldn't win for losing. And then if I fail, they keep flailing away. It was the most awful thing I've ever been through.
Well, but to be fair, look, it was unprecedented what was going on. And it was, I mean, it wasn't like we all were trying to figure out what to do, how to stand against, the Russians stealing information and dumping it out into the public arena, the intervention by the FBI director, the, whole swirling mess of stuff that was happening. And that's why this debate that we're having now in the United States is so critically important, because we're getting a better sense of what happened back then. But what is most troubling, even terrifying to me, is that we see a lot of what did happen back then is continuing to happen now. The big lie technique wasn't started in the 2016 American election. It's something that authoritarian regimes, authoritarian leaders engage in. The Russian active measures didn't start in the 2016 campaign. We know that it's part of their continuing effort to undermine not only the United States, but the West, to sow discord, to take our diversity in Canada, the United States, and turn it against us. So part of what's so frustrating is there were external factors at work in that election that we had not seen before. And the press hadn't seen them before. They didn't know how to cover them. The Obama administration saw them, didn't know quite what to do about them, tried to get the Congress leadership involved, but the Republicans basically said back off, or will claim that you're just doing it for partisan reasons. There was so much going on. And in the last few weeks with the Mueller report coming out, I've been saying, and said it again last night on a TV show, that we've got to learn those lessons. And so what Bill is expressing is, of course, personal frustration and the kind of sense of helplessness that he felt, that I felt. But it's much bigger than that. And that's what bothers me, is that we can't turn away from what is still going on. And increasingly, we see this administration in our country undermining our institutions, undermining the rule of law. The appearance by the Attorney General was the appearance of a defense attorney for the president, not the leading law enforcement official.
Watching that, for me, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, in sort of however many years I've been alive, I felt like for the first time I was witnessing my own country behaving like an authoritarian regime. I felt like I was seeing displays that I've had to study in how other countries around the world have fallen apart. We hear Donald Trump echoing verbiage so similar to the verbiage being used in Rwanda in the weeks leading up to that country's genocide. Not far out, when people say it could never happen here, I feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall saying it is happening here. And I know that, we're talking about what's happening for us at home, but it obviously has ramifications for all of us around the globe. And I think a lot about what our deteriorating position in the world means for us and for our neighbors. And do you think we're getting here because of social media? And I ask that because we find ourselves in this cultural moment where we no longer have a common set of facts, where people are challenging science as though 2 + 2 does not always equal 4. And I think all of us who understand basic math are going, yes, it does, and that's perfect. Why are we having this conversation? But, fake news is spreading like wildfire. People are being intentionally misled by foreign adversaries, and people are being radicalized online. And while the internet and social media has been such an incredible tool also for advocacy, for philanthropic organizations, and for social movements, it really does feel to me like it's the Wild West of the battle for good and evil. And it makes me think in particular about something which President Clinton, I have seen you be such a leader on. Because on the negative side of social media and the way that it allows hatred to foster, we see this uptick in white supremacist language and outcomes of white supremacist terrorism. 2 days ago in North Carolina, last week in San Diego, a few weeks back in New Zealand. This is a problem. And you, when you were president, were able to pass what feels to me, by the way, as a gun owner, like very sensible legislation. You banned assault weapons, you passed the Brady Bill, and you did create other sensible legislation in our country. But those laws have lapsed in following administrations, and I'm curious what you both think we need to do to get back to the sensible conversation, because it's been a long time, and I remember this from when I was a kid. It's been a long time since you, campaigning for president, went and sat in a diner with hunters and outdoorsmen in Arkansas and said, hey, I'm not trying to take your hobby away. I'm not trying to take away your activity with your kids. I'm just trying to protect all of us. And how do we get back
Well,
there?
I think there are, look at that, I'm on the hunting jacket.
There it is.
Yeah, I want to emphasize something. You asked me how I felt, I told you. But that was then. I think both of you and I feel that we've been incredibly lucky. This is not about us. We are now in a bi-religious family because my son-in-law is Jewish. And Chelsea is a practicing Christian, but she now knows as much as her husband does about Jewish faith. So they asked us to host the Passover dinner, which we did. We had to figure out how to get everything we needed. But we did it. The point I'm trying to make is somebody will be disappointed in every election. I think the consequences is what we need to deal with. Now, you asked the question. We passed the assault weapons ban, the ammunition clip limit, and the Brady Bill. And it was hard. And a lot of my party lost their seats in Congress because of it. And it happened because I underestimated the extent to which the NRA could terrify the voters in the districts that were vulnerable, because in my state, where half the people have a home Washington, both my senators voted for it, the Democrats in the Congress and the Arkansas then voted for it, every one of them was reelected. Why? Because we talk to people about it. So the first thing I would say is, if you want to run for office in Canada or anywhere else in the world, if somebody tells you, you hire a political consultant, they say, okay, there are 5 issues that are important to the voters, and on 4 of them, you're winning 3-1. And you're winning this controversial, let's take the gun issue, you're winning this, but only about 55 to 45 of the people that are mad about it are really mad about it. So by all means, talk about the other issues. That is the opposite of the advice you should give. In other words, if all you did was talk about things that were popular, no marriage would survive, no friendship would survive, no movie would be good, no great endeavor would succeed. Right? You have to talk about the things you just as soon not talk about. And you have to respect other people. So what can we do? Well, part of it's already been done by the students at Stoneman Douglas Park. That is, as Hillary said repeatedly, we kept losing on the gun issue, even though all the polls showed our position was popular, because it was not a voting issue for the people who agreed with us, because they thought, what could be more obvious that we ought to have sensible background checks? But we differ on taxes or education or whatever. For the people who were against us, it was the only voting issue. So if people are 70 to 30 for universal background checks, but only 10% of the 70 will vote against you if you disagree with them, and 2/3 of the 30 will vote against you if you disagree with them, the real issue is 20 to 10. So every elected politician has to think, can I lose 10% of the vote and still be elected? The Stoneman Douglas kids said, our lives should be a voting issue for you. We deserve to grow up. We deserve to have a decent life. And so do kids everywhere. They went to Chicago and made common cause with inner city African American and Hispanic kids. They made common cause with the mothers of the movement that Hillary spent so much time on. They made it a voting issue. So that's the first one. So we win 65 seats in the House. 40 belong to the Republicans. And we're prepared to have sensible legislation. We can't pass it in the Senate because the NRA still has a veto. We can't get it signed in the White House. You have to win a few more elections. That's one option. Option two is to take action at the state level. New York has very progressive laws, and it does help. Yeah. Not as good as the national law, but it makes a difference. America's a big country. The third thing you can do is put some of these issues on the ballot. I remember we just had the 20th anniversary of the slaughter at Columbine in Colorado. And they put it on the ballot, closing the gun sale of the world. They have universal background checks. They weren't all online sales then. And the voters voted 70 to 30 to close it. Why? Because in gun country, people trust themselves more than the politicians. They could read what the restrictions were. Now, what should the message be? I think you can say all mean things about the NRA guys you want. It was really fun watching Oliver North and Wayne LaPierre fight with each other last night. But most of these people are good people. And so what in America used to say is to these people who disagree, say, look, you have a constitutional right to have a gun. The Supreme Court has upheld that. I will do nothing to take away your gun for hunting, for sports shooting, for self-protection. Canada's a big country, right? The second biggest country on earth, with 30-something million people. So if you lived out if you didn't live in Vancouver and you lived in some place where the nearest law enforcement was 2 hours away, you'd probably have some way to protect your family. So we need to tell them, we don't want to take that away from you, but we need your help. People are dying like flies in these mass shootings. Children's lives are in danger. And you can help to save their lives by having universal background checks. It won't kill you to wait another day for us to do a good universal background check or to look into the mental health records. It won't kill you if we have a restriction on assault weapons that undermines the ability of somebody to kill 25 people at just one time. Yeah. We need your help. Help us. And ask them to help. I personally believe that's more effective. And I hope we can do that. And this is madness what we're doing now. We've got to do something better.
You know, the other part of your question, I mean, we think a lot about this because of what Bill did when he was president and what I voted for unsuccessfully when I was in the Senate and then in my campaigns, you know, arguing for this kind of sensible approach. But you mentioned the social media element of this, and I think I don't know what to do about it, but I think we need to have more discussion because actually a big majority of people in America want to do these changes, like universal background checks. The number of people in America owning guns has actually gone down, but the number of people who do own guns own more guns.
Yeah.
And there is this constant drumbeat of agitation and resentment and anger and hatred, and whether you call it white supremacy or nationalism or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, whatever it is that is motivating all of this anger online. And unfortunately, we now see these shooters, these killers, posting their manifestos, and they are filled with the most vile and virulent, terrible hatred. And it can now not just be shared with a few people that you know, it goes around the world. And so, as you rightly said, look, we've got to figure out how to deal with this. I saw today that Facebook is taking some of the big hater sites, like Alex Jones, off of Facebook. It's taken a while, but when most people in the world get their news from Facebook, which is what has happened in the last couple of years, that's where they're getting so much of this hate just pumped into them. So I don't know what the answers are. Carol Kaltenwalder, the TED Talk that she gave here in Vancouver, I think.
Yes,
I have followed her writing in The Guardian about social media and the role they played in Brexit, and the role that she sees the company still playing, that they haven't changed their platforms enough. The algorithms, as you rightly say, are being developed in a way that really advantage controversy, conspiracy, conflict. So there's a lot happening right now that is just embedded in our culture, and we have to figure out what we're going to do about it. The final thing I want to say about this, which I find so ironic, some of you with small children, or in our case now grandchildren, may have seen the research about how you shouldn't let little kids have screen time. None at all for kids under, I guess, 2, and then between 2 and 5, very limited. And it's from great research and behavioral research. But what I found most fascinating is that parents in Silicon Valley are at the forefront. They produce this content, they create these platforms, and they don't let their own little children have access to them because they know the impact that it will have on their brain development and on their social views. So something is happening, and we're going to have to do more than we're doing now to try to rein it in, and particularly deal with the impact on children, because it does affect the brain development, and there's now increasing evidence that teenagers, young adults, have higher levels of anxiety and depression because of their addiction to social media. So imagine that somebody who is already inclined, maybe they are, mentally ill, or at least having some kinds of problems, they're mentally unbalanced, whatever it might be, they have difficulties in their own lives, so they're already vulnerable, and then they get radicalized online. And then, unfortunately, we see too many doing things that are dangerous to others.
Yes, and you see that even, we see it in our country and increasingly around the world with mass shootings. But when we talk about, as we mentioned, this radicalization and this rise of white supremacy, it's a parallel, horrific mirror to other kinds of radicalization. And you see what happened online because intelligence warnings were ignored in Sri Lanka. People in Sri Lanka were being radicalized by a shrinking ISIS cell. And so we have to be mindful of what this technology means and mindful of how, as you said, we watch it and we monitor it. And unfortunately, we have a current president in our country who ignores intelligence reports. So I don't know what any of it means.
Well, I think, one thing it means is that, first of all, what you just said was incredibly sensible. I mean, look, some of this is human nature and it's always been there, but there's more of it now. I mean, what the technology does is to amplify our ability to do good and feel bad. And therefore we have to take extra precautions. I mean, if you look at it, look, there's always in every society some sort of wolf at the door. In every one of us, there's a wolf at the door. You wake up every morning and your fears are dominating or your hopes are dominating. You feel good about where you are or you're not so good about where you are. We all fight this. I mean, when I was president, we had the armed militia in Michigan. Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma Federal Building. Poor Matthew Shepard was stretched out on a rack of a fence in Wyoming for being gay. James Byrd was dragged to the streets and dismembered virtually because he was a black and had these things have this dark side is found. The question is, do you feed it or restrict it?
Right.
You know, do you stand up against it? That's why I thought President Obama was so good after the church killings in Charleston. And I thought the current president did the wrong thing after Charleston. Because I grew up with this. You know, I don't want to make this political. I grew up with this. And the wolf is always at the door. But if you don't like hand out assault weapons, look at we now are light years ahead of every other country in the world in mass killings. To find us 4 more people killed at the same time in the same place. And so the way you said it is what made sense. And what Hillary said about Silicon Valley made sense. In other words, think about your kid going in a child restraint seat. That reflects your child's freedom of movement restriction. And so the equivalent of these crazy websites is somebody gets on the internet and says, you know, I just don't believe this, and I have a right to believe what I want, and my belief is as valid as your facts. And I think if I just throw my kid in the back seat, my child will do fine. And I think I'll take a chance. You wouldn't do that, would you? If it was your kid, you wouldn't risk your child or your grandchild doing that. That's what we're doing when we deny sensible gun legislation. That's what we're doing when we get into climate change denial. That's what we're doing in issue after issue after issue in society all over the world. That's what we need. We need the technology to at least protect us against what is always a small core of paranoia becoming a disease that sweeps across the society and compromises our children's future.
And to your point, we have to advocate for our communities, both our neighboring communities and our global communities, in the way that we would advocate for our children. That needs to be our base mode of operating.
That's exactly right. You know, I started off as a child advocate. It is still, you know, the closest cause to my heart. And I always try to make the argument that you do have an obligation not only to your own children, but to all children. But even if you don't feel that, if you don't feel like you have some humanitarian or moral obligation, think about your own self-interest. Think about whether you want an educated workforce, whether you want a peaceful society, whether you want healthy people. So think about what you can do to make sure that not just your own children, but all children have more opportunity. And yet now we see not only the points Bill was making, but you know, people don't vaccinate their children, and it's just now an increasing problem in the United States. And who's it going to hurt besides the unvaccinated children who are now getting measles in the very high hundreds around our country? If you're a little baby, before you're a year old, you can't get vaccinated. If you have a compromised immune system with some kind of chronic disease, you can't get vaccinated. But if you have enough people who choose not to get vaccinated, not because of the science, because they have their own quote opinions, then you lose what's called herd or community immunity, and you put more and more people at risk. So we're living in this crazy experience where people with newborn babies don't want to leave their house because they don't want to run into somebody who might not have been vaccinated. We have children being put in cages at our southern border, being separated from their families. How cruel is that? And it sends a signal that we don't really care about your humanity, and it doesn't matter if you're a child or not. We're going to separate you from your family, and oh, by the way, we don't have a system to determine whether we'll ever find your family again. These tear at the fabric of society. They are not only morally wrong, they are short-sighted. They undermine our common ground, our sense of common purpose. And so when you think about what's happening in the world today, there have always been the outliers. There have always been people who have committed terrible crimes, who have fomented conspiracies. But if we allow these kinds of behaviors to become normalized, then we do slowly but surely cede our reason, cede our freedom to people who are manipulating us. And the best way to manipulate currently is online social media. So this is all connected together, and it is something that we feel strongly about and we'd love to have more of a conversation about, but it's so hard to have those conversations except in settings like this with people who are interested in thinking about these issues, because the world moves so fast. Everybody wants whatever the quickest headline is, and then it's going to be a new one in 30 minutes, and then you're in information overload, and none of it really can stick with you, and you just kind of do the best you can. That's no way to keep a free democratic society functioning, because we have to make decisions together based on facts and evidence about what is best for us and our children.
So both of you, okay, I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to cut off the president. The both of you, when you talk about maintaining a free and democratic society and world, you do such incredible work with the Clinton Foundation, and you started working with your emphasis in foreign policy, and you took it through the foundation. And I'm wondering, across the causes that you advocate for and the places that you've shown up for, two things: what really just brings a smile to your face, what you're so proud of. I'm particularly such a fan of all of the incredible work that we've done in Africa, especially on the AIDS crisis. And President Clinton, on that work, I've heard you speak over the years about becoming friends with Nelson Mandela. And so as you talk about global advocacy, and him in particular, I'm wondering what really lights you up, and on the subject of Mandela, what advice he might have shared with you that you could share with the rest of us who've never been a president.
First of all, I'm proud of a lot of things that our foundation has done. I'm really proud that my daughter has joined us in all the things she's done. But I was proud of you when you were backstage telling me about what you're doing with your business model, trying to get into the social business, and you should let her give you the website for it. It's really amazing, because I find that for all of you, I don't want anybody to leave here kind of down. I actually am pretty upbeat about it. I think the world will be more like Vancouver in 10 years than it is now. And I think so. The most effective strategy is not to moan about the past and criticize the present. The most effective strategy is to live in a way that paints a different picture of the future that people can see. Because even if you win an argument, you may not change the way the mind works. But if people see and experience something different, it does change the way the mind works. So whenever I get discouraged, I try to think of something small and medium. It's like, I love the fact that more than half the people in the world who are being kept alive with AIDS medicine got on contracts that the Clinton Health Access Initiative did. I love the fact that when we did the Clinton Global Initiative, which we still do for university students, we had an independent evaluator say it helped 430 million people in 180 countries in 12 years and raised over $100 billion worth of things that actually changed lives in a quantifiable way. But I also like the fact that we help 155,000 little farmers, most of whom farm an acre or less in Africa. And we consider ourselves failure if we only double their incomes. We usually triple, quadruple, quintuple their income. Just by giving them things that farmers in Canada and America take for granted: better seed, better fertilizer, adequate storage, being able to take your crops to market without having to pay half your income, and knowing what the market price is, you can't be ripped off. That kind of stuff really matters. And I would urge everybody to think about that. And I want to say the other thing that helps me when I get down is to think of something really big that makes me feel strong, small, but want to hold on to life in a positive way. And we can go over it with that because I want you. Most of you probably saw on the press the last 2 weeks the first picture we'd ever had of one of the black holes in the universe. Remember that? So it's 55 million light years away. Hillary brought Stephen Hawking to the White House for the first time in 2000 when we celebrated the millennium. And he was trying to explain to adults like me, who, I didn't make a very good grade in physics, about the black hole. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So I'm looking at this picture of the black hole, 55 million light years away. And it is so powerful, they told us, that if our solar system, not our Earth, our solar system, went by too close to it, it would suck the whole thing in. And it would turn the entire planet Earth into a glob of dirt that would fit into a thimble. Now think about that. If you're an American politician, once that happens, it doesn't matter too much who's on Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is really the grain of sand. Well, Hillary and I went to the biggest telescope in the world, the Keck telescope in Hawaii, in the Big Island, a couple years ago. And we talked to the person running it, and we looked at Andromeda. We looked outside our own, the constellation, our own galaxy. And I said, we asked, do you have an argument about the likelihood of life on other planets? He said, we have a vigorous argument. Our difference is between whether it's 85% likely that there's life on another planet or 95% likely. And so I'm thinking, you've got a little time to live since the life began on planet Earth out of the primordial slime, the single-cell organisms over 3 billion years ago. And we're just a tiny dot in a universe of a billion galaxies, not planets, galaxies. And it's expanding. Why in God's name would we risk our lives, waste our lives, talking about how important our differences over race or religion or sexual identity or anything else? Why are we doing this? Think about the tiny place we occupy in a vast universe. Think about what would happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but if we got turned into a thimble full of dirt. And how would you explain the life you've lived if you're small-minded and divisive? When you could just lift somebody up. And then if, God forbid, something terrible happens to you tomorrow, you can still say, in our family's mantra is to always get caught trying so that people will be better off when you quit than you started. The children have a brighter future and things are coming together and be enjoyable. That's a pretty good answer to what happens if you get sucked into the black hole. I'm telling you, I think it helps me, and I hope it will help you to think about both how small and how big we can be at the same time.
Well, because I was part of our delegation that went to his inauguration back in 1994. And we were thrilled. Bill and I had, followed him, been, supportive of anti-apartheid efforts. Got up early in the morning to watch him walk out of, prison, and thrilled when he got elected. And we had met him. We later became, very close to him. But in 1994, we went to the formal inauguration, and then we went back to the president's house, which had transitioned from de Klerk in the morning to Nelson Mandela in the afternoon. And there was a big tent on the lawn, and it was a big luncheon, and there were a lot of really literally kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents and other, very well-known people at this luncheon under this tent. And Mandela came in to this luncheon, and he greeted everyone in his incredibly gracious manner. And then he said, "But I have to tell you, as pleased as I am that there are so many very important people here from all over the world, the three people who are the most important to me, I especially invited, and I want to introduce them to you." And he called out the names of these three men, white men, middle-aged white men who stood up when Mandela called out their names. And then Mandela said, "These are three of my former jailers. They were part of the group over all the years I was at Robbins Island who guarded us, who watched over us. And these three men treated me like I was a man. They treated me with dignity. They treated me with respect. And I never forgot the way that made me feel at a time when I was spending my days breaking rocks in the lime quarry, and when I was spending my nights trying to help teach the younger prisoners who had never been given an education how to read. And I wanted them here today with all of you very famous people, because in a very real way, they kept my hope about what this country could be alive, because there were people like that. And there was no one who I ever met in all of the travels and the many experiences I've ever had who understood more deeply what Bill was just talking about, and who had more reason than most to be bitter, to be angry, to be resentful, to feel sorry for himself. His whole life just ripped away, leaving his children and his wife, Winnie, at the time, to fend for themselves in a really hostile environment. There was no one who could have been more vindictive, more self-righteous, but who learned in prison that if he did not let go of that hate and that anger, even if eventually he got out, he would never be free. So for me, and I think I can say for Bill and for our daughter who adored him, that puts so much in perspective. Going right back to the beginning of your questions, you can be criticized, but I've never spent more than 2 decades in prison. You can be falsely accused of all kinds of crazy stuff. But you see someone who gave his most productive years to the idea of freedom and came out determined to have a peaceful transition and a process of reconciliation. It really does, for me, underscore how important it is for people to develop some perspective about what really is important here on Earth and up in the cosmos.
One of the reasons I think we like Mandela so much is that he didn't privately pretend to be a saint. You know, we were serving together this entire term. Every now and then we'd fight over something. I helped him make South Africa a non-nuclear state, and we did a lot of things together. And then sometimes something would happen, and I would see all the nightmares go before his eyes. He'd be 27 years in jail, 14 years with 14 by 14 cell, breaking laws, doing all this stuff, all the horrible things he went through. And the thing that I loved about him, as Hillary said, is that it was still there, and he made it go away in a blink of time. He had the most mental and emotional discipline of anyone I've ever known. And one day I was goaded because we were having fun and we were both out of office. And I said, no, we weren't out of office. It was near the end of the I said, Hillary and I got Chelsea up to watch you walk free.